Welcome in the latest episode of the Five on the Floor podcast on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Make sure to check out 5reasonsports.com. Spell it out, F-I-V-E, reasonsports.com. All the latest columns on the Miami Heat, but also the Miami Dolphins, Hurricanes, the Panthers, who look like they're flaming out again before the playoffs. And, of course, don't forget, we've got Miami Marlins coverage now with spring training starting, and also Miami FC played its first game. Excuse me, not Miami FC. I'm used to Miami FC. Inter Miami played its first game out in Los Angeles on Sunday, its first match, and so we'll have coverage of that as well. We do a lot of soccer on the network. Also, check out one of our great new sponsors, also an old sponsor, Doral Toyota. Doral Toyota is celebrating its 50th anniversary with below-market prices on new and used vehicles. 5 Reasons Sports listeners will get a dedicated manager to work with over 1,500 new and used cars to choose from, easy to get to right off 826 and 836, a few blocks from International Mall. In-house financing available for credit-related challenges, so visit DoralToyota.com. Again, that's DoralToyota.com for more details, or people in our network who drive cars from Doral Toyota because they had such a good experience there, or visit the showroom. It's at 9775 Northwest 12th Street in Doral. Again, that's 9775 Northwest 12th Street in Doral, DoralToyota.com. And now, today's episode.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a Miami Heat and NBA podcast from Ethan Skolnick with Alphonse Sidney, a.k.a. Alf954. Brought to you by the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, Ethan Skolnick, I've got Alex Toledo today. Alphonse Sidney is in Colombia somewhere. I think it was Medellin. He posted something on Instagram saying that what happened last night is not for public consumption. So he was not available to us tonight. We have considered alternative co-hosts. We're going to discuss someone named Chef Trilly today because I think he would be a good candidate to replace Alf if Alf doesn't make it back. But we're going to give Alf another 24 hours to return from Colombia without anybody else. Nobody he didn't come with should come back with him from Colombia. I just want to be clear on that. All right. We're going to get to some basketball here. We've got a 2-part podcast today, Alex, and you've got some other things going on tonight. I want to get to what happened over the weekend against the Mavericks and the Nets. You and I were both at the Mavericks game, not at the Nets game, although we both watched it. And then I want to focus on what everybody really wants to focus on, was the Bucks game and a certain player who had something like 80 points and 25 rebounds in a win today. What happened over the weekend that hasn't been happening? What turned? How do you go from losing to the Hawks, to the Cavaliers, to the Wolves, to beating a good Dallas team and an okay Nets team that you lost to the last time up in Brooklyn? What changed?
Well, I think really what changed, when you just get right down to it, is their execution in the second half, specifically their defensive execution, right? I think they really rallied around their defensive effort there. You saw a lot of positive defense from Crowder and Iguodala. They did a really good job guarding Luka, not really letting him get going. But, the Barea thing was always going to happen because that's what Barea does when he comes down to Miami. But, yeah, they in the second half, in the fourth quarter, they really rallied around the defensive effort, and that's what ended up creating easier points for them. And that's what I think is going to ultimately come down to. Whether or not they get to the second round is how much can they depend on their defense when it really matters, and can they get enough stops to create points, and also having offensive guys in the lineup, right? Like how many offensive guys you're going to have to give up to get to those really good defensive lineups. So I think it was good to see them get through it, right, and perform in the fourth quarter after these slippages they've had over the past few games.
Well, they did have some slippage. I mean, they let both of those games get closer than they should have at certain points.
But they responded this time.
The Nets game, they did, right. There was a point that they made it stop. A couple of things I want to focus on, because I do agree with you to a certain degree, the defense, but I think in some ways it was the offense being able to hit a different gear when they needed it. Okay, so to me, 3 things happened there, and beyond just Jimmy, who had his moments, obviously. But the first thing to me was Kelly Olynyk has resurfaced as a viable rotation player for this team. And I think even Eric Spoelstra acknowledged that this has been a long time coming. This is now some consistency from Kelly. He's getting back to a lot. I mean, he had 9 assists in the Dallas game. He's getting back to a lot of the things that he was doing before, the dribble handoff stuff you've talked about, and being a legitimate backup center replacement for Bam. He's never going to be a rim protector. They're not going to have Myers now for a longer period of time. I've got some news nuggets on the pod, too, I'm going to drop. So remind me on that. But I just think when you look at, what Kelly's providing right now, it's exactly what they envisioned. And he just hasn't gotten to it. The second thing is Dragic being able to give them what they need when they need it, which, again, if we had Simon Smith on, and he kind of got into, this idea of Dragic being pretty awful down the stretch this season in the last 4 to 5 minutes in tight games. Like he's scored the most fourth quarter points on the team, but when it's really mattered, he hasn't been there. He was there over the weekend. I think that was another big thing. And the third thing, and I don't think we talk about him enough, and I noticed this, we did it again in the post-game video the other night, Alex, is we always sort of just take Kendrick Nunn will score 22 on 55% shooting, and we don't discuss it. Kendrick Nunn, since the All-Star break, and you and I were both in Chicago, we both said he looked healthy in that Rising Stars game. Everybody's like, it's a Rising Stars game. But he looked different. We said it at the time. And he's shooting almost 60% from the field and averaging, I think, 19 points a game since the break. So, this has happened now several times with Kendrick this season where it's like he takes a step back but immediately gets the step forward after it. And he's done it again.
I think we got to give him some credit here. 100% what you're saying is true. But I think the main reason we don't really talk about it like that, especially during home games, is because we know what we're getting from Kendrick Nunn at home, right? He's going to give you scoring. He's going to give you efficient scoring, pull-up shots. He's going to wait for the defense to drop, and he's going to take the open shot. I think that's what pretty much Spo has told him to do every time he's out there, right? Because Spo knows that the defenses are going to drop on Jimmy and Bam pick and rolls. And so they're going to say, whenever they drop on the pick and roll, Kendrick Nunn, you shoot it. And, that's doesn't even need to be said with Duncan because they wouldn't dare drop on Duncan. But every time that they drop on Nunn, he's going to sink it. And they're going to need that from him in the playoffs. So what he's brought to his team, the consistent 15 points per game, more or less scoring that he's brought as a pull-up threat, which they don't really have outside of, him and Hero. You got Dragic doing it off the bench. But again, all of these guys are not great defenders. But what you're saying is true. He's looked absolutely better than what he did beforehand. And they're really going to need his scoring in the playoffs as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And I've got something on him we're going to get to, like I said, in the second part of the podcast. So I think we've kind of covered it to a large degree in terms of what happened. I don't want to over-focus on it over the weekend. I mean, they righted themselves. I don't think they've fixed all the problems.
And it was weird that they went to zone versus Dallas, which has a number one offense in the league by a decent margin by offensive rating. And they have a lot of shooting, and the Heat went to zone anyways, and it ended up working out.
It worked out, but barely. I still don't love it.
That should be noted. The way to cap it off is that the Heat were able to actually play defense versus the number one offense in the league, right? We've seen them play bad defense versus all these bad teams, and we were kind of wondering how good is his defense. We're still wondering that because they've been hovering around 20th in the league since December, and for them to do that versus the number one offense, it's got to be gratifying.
Well, you mentioned it too. Iguodala looked better. I think the last two games in particular, there was that one sequence we mentioned on Twitter. There was the guy behind us at the Dallas game who was riding him incessantly. You can't guard anybody. Get him off the floor. Don't let him touch the ball on offense. And then he had that sequence, which was maybe one of his best sequence with the Heat, where he made a defensive play and then on the other end, smashed a dunk on the break.
Still looks pretty athletic.
People forget about him. When he came into the league, he was an above the rim player. I mean, he wasn't DJJ, but he was a dunker. The whole issue with Iguodala in Philadelphia was that he wasn't really a true number one guy. That was the thing. But he was kind of ostensibly the number one on that team that played the Big Three Heat. I guess it was 2011 playoffs, 2010, 2011 season that also had Drew Holiday, also had Thad Young. But Iguodala was at the time, their best player or their best all-around player. They had Lou Williams too, and they were still playing through Iguodala. So, but look, all they want from him, and we've talked about it, is that they want to be able to count on him to make smart plays, and to guard the position, play the passing lanes, create a couple of things with his quick hands and deflections, and change some of the momentum of the game in that way. And I thought, we can again talk about the whether that was a brilliant move or not to pick him up. And I think that's a conversation we need to keep having. But I think what we saw was kind of what they want from him. And so I think he's getting a little bit closer. But I think overall, Alex, to me, what they pretty much did was they kind of made up for somewhat in the standings what should have been those wins against the Cavs and the Wolves, at least. Because I thought the Dallas game might be a loss at home. I thought Nets was probably a win, but at least you got one back, basically. So you got one back, and as we look today, I'm looking at Philadelphia. Their schedule is catching up with them with, especially their injuries. I mean, they gave up 1 million points tonight, and they've got the Lakers on Tuesday night. And so and they're a half game ahead of Indiana. So you're still kind of keeping the home court, which is what you want to keep. So all of that is better. I got time for one news nugget, and then you and I are going to discuss Giannis the whole rest of the podcast. Justise Winslow. We've talked about this repeatedly. Do you think people are tired of this topic, Alex? I don't know.
I'm not sure because I still see a lot of people who bring up the trade on Twitter and are upset that Winslow's not a part of it anymore.
Still not playing, by the way, right?
I mean, I'm still upset about it, but I'm past it. But it's all every time I think about it, I'm like, oh man, just unfortunate.
Well, I think people would be more upset about it if he was playing right now, right? Like that, isn't that? I mean, at least he's not.
Oh, they
playing.
would be upset with the Heat right now if he was playing because then it would make it look like the Heat were just kind of, bullying. I don't know. I don't even know what people would think. But if he were to play, it would go against everything that they've said or what's come out from them is that they didn't really know when he was going to play again.
Right. All right. So let me give you a little detail on that. Like I said, I've got 6 or 7 things that I've heard and confirmed over the past few days about various topics that I'll kind of be sprinkling in to the podcast, like rainbow sprinkles on your donut in the morning. So here's the Justise Winslow one. Remember I've been saying repeatedly that, he and the Heat were not on the same page on the injury, that was the big issue there was a report that came out that said the opposite during this whole thing. And I was told it was crazy, and it was crazy. During this entire period of time, Justise thought the injury was worse than the Heat did. Okay. I mean, that wasn't the only issue. There were other issues that led the Heat to believe that maybe Justise just didn't want to be here anymore, but that was the major issue. What I was told, and I got this confirmed even after I spoke to you about it, because you and I talked about it when I was told this over the weekend, that when Justise had an MRI, he had it from a doctor, obviously, and the doctor told him essentially, look, I'm not finding anything. Not to say that you're not hurt, but there's nothing on this MRI. And Justise got visibly upset. That's what I was told. Visibly upset and verbally upset that the doctor had not found anything. There's a little bit more detail to this, which I told you sort of on the side, but again, it's something that I would need to get confirmed 3 times to report. But let's just be straight here. What I was talking about there being a disconnect, it was even stronger than I indicated earlier. Okay. I mean, to the point where, like I said, Justise was insistent that there was a problem and didn't believe that. Not only did he not believe that the Heat understood the seriousness of the problem, but sort of didn't believe that the doctors understood the seriousness of the problem, and that with all of that, there was a lack of trust in whether the problem was being expressed accurately to him. And all of those things together, if that makes sense, and I know you know more to this story, but this is kind of what I want to reveal on the pod. All of that together is why it just was not viable at all. And whether or not, he's playing in Memphis now, and whether or not the doctors in Memphis agree with him, or whether or not they're just sort of going, okay, we're going to just let you sit out now to get yourself right until you feel comfortable. The Heat, as much as they, I think, would have liked to have gone forward with him, basically decided as a result of this that there was trust that was broken and it just wasn't going to work long term. Does any of that make sense?
It does. It does. Yeah. It sounds like, it really was just about the trust there, right? It had gotten to a point of almost no return is what it sounds like when you describe it.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically what it was. And again, like I said, the trust extended to the point that he didn't trust the doctors who were treating him. And so when you get to that stage, it's not going to get better. I think, what we saw in San Antonio with Kawhi, and people made this comparison on Twitter, there was some of that going on here. All right?
How about a more poignant one? Chris Bosh.
Yes, yeah, and the Bosch one was more complicated, of course, because that was a life or death situation, right? Um, and that was not the Bosch one was not a question of what it is that he had, right?
No, but he was
Like,
questioning other doctors, right? Like
correct. He was questioning. It wasn't that they were telling him something and he's like, oh no, I don't have that. It was more so which is really what Winslow was doing, although it was the reverse. The doctors were telling him he didn't have something and he was saying he did. With Bosch, it was more how serious this is and what made that and how risky is it and should you
to return to the floor.
To return to the floor. And what made that situation odd, of course, is that in most cases, an organization or a team is accused of pushing a player to go back out there. Again, that's kind of what the Winslow situation is, right? Like, I mean, I'm not saying the Heat were pushing him, but that's kind of the insinuation.
Kind of what happened with Whiteside a couple times, right?
Correct. I mean, right. But with Bosch, it was the opposite. The Heat were being prudent. Now, you can say, were they being prudent because they just loved Chris Bosch, or were they being prudent because there were liability issues? Whatever the reason, they were being prudent, and I always agreed with them. And even though my feelings for Bosch and for everybody around him, and I love that guy, but the reality is, I think he was wrong, and I think he's realized over time he was wrong. That the Heat were looking out for his best interest. He did say it, right? And the other thing was, no other team would sanction him to play, right? So it's not just like it was just the Heat. He shopped it, and he couldn't find anybody. So
remember when those rumors came out, like a couple of years later, that he would maybe consider returning
for the Lakers? Yeah, right. That
tells you that that the idea was shopped around, and no team was actually had the balls to try to do something like that.
No, they went public with it in that way to see if a team would jump forward. And I remember being in Toronto during that whole scene in the 15-16 season. And if you remember, he came back to Miami and Bosch's wife and some of her friends were wearing these T-shirts, right? I forgot what the T-shirt said now, but basically they were trying to make the point publicly that he could play and the Heat weren't letting him and it was the Heat's fault. Like I said, all of that, Chris has gotten his number retired. It's all water under the bridge now. But what I'm saying is that was the opposite of this. This was more so player thinks there's a real problem. Team is like, we'd love to help you, but our medical people, other medical people you've gone to are not saying the same thing. Where do we go from here? And the whole thing basically broke down. But like I said, I'd heard he was visibly upset about the MRI coming back the way it came back because it was inconsistent with his belief that he had something serious. So there we are. All right, we're going to get to more stuff after the break. Before we do, I want to tell you about the Seltzer Mayberg Law Firm. You can find them at onecalllegal.com. Spell it out, O-N-E, calllegal.com. They've got someone there 24 hours a day to handle any kind of legal claim that you might have, whether it's immigration, personal injury, slip and fall, traffic ticket. They're getting into sports law now. We actually work out of that office in North Miami. It's right before Golden Glades. So as you're waiting an hour and a half in traffic because they never fix the construction over there, you can give the Seltzer Mayberg Law Firm a call and even pop in and say hello to everybody there. Again, it's onecalllegal.com, onecalllegal.com. All right, it's Ethan Skolnick again. We promised you that we were going to talk about Giannis, and we will, but we had some technical issues with the second half of this podcast, so we've decided to release that part separately. So look for that later today. We're going to get fully into the Giannis to Miami possibility, Giannis 2021. One of the things you can do is go to our website. We've got a flash sale on there for 10% off for all merchandise, but that includes our Giannis Bam 21 shirt. So check that out. I'll have more details about this other nugget that I promised. We did all of this, but we didn't want to give you that recording because of the way that it came out. So look for it later today. So this podcast, just a recap of the weekend and some of the Justise Winslow stuff, and then I will get to Giannis with Alex before the Bucks Heat game on Monday night, and then we'll do another podcast after the game. So thanks for hanging with us. We appreciate it. That podcast will be out anytime now.
Thank you for listening to the Five on the Floor on the Five Regional Sports Network.